They said my garden was a threat to property values. They sent me fines, letters, even threats, all because I dared to plant something real. Flowers instead of turf, life instead of control. When the HOA demanded I destroy it, I didn't fight with anger. I fought with nature. What started as one man's backyard rebellion turned into a movement that shook the entire neighborhood and exposed just how far an HOA will go to stay in power. Because when you mess with someone's garden, sometimes you awaken something much bigger. The fines, the threats, and the spark. The next 2 weeks were war. Every morning, another letter. Every evening, another fine. They sent me photos of my own garden, printed out with circles drawn around violations. A bee house? Violation. Bird bath? Violation. Wildflowers over 6 inches tall? Violation. By the end of the month, I owed them $1,750. That's when I went to my first HOA meeting. The community hall smelled like burnt coffee and fake perfume. A dozen people sat around a long table, papers stacked high. And at the head of the table sat Karen. Not kidding, her real name was Karen. HOA president. Hair sprayed so tight it looked like it hurt. When my turn came, I stood up with a folder of photos. I showed them bees, butterflies, even a robin nesting in my shrubs. This isn't neglect, I said. It's nature. It's what this neighborhood needs. Karen smiled, a slow, condescending smile. Sir, this is a community, not a farm. The room laughed. You're in violation of Section 4.2b, non-conforming landscaping. You have until next Friday to remove it or face legal action. I clenched my fists, thanked them for their time, and walked out before I said something I'd regret. That night, I sat in my backyard under the dim garden lights, staring at what they called non-conforming. Bees sleeping on petals. A frog near the bird bath, fireflies blinking in the dark. And then, an idea sparked. What if I could make this garden legally untouchable? That night, I opened my laptop. I started researching state and federal laws on wildlife protection, native plant programs, and environmental certifications. 3 hours later, I found it. The State Wildlife Habitat Certification Program, a government-recognized initiative that protected certified properties from local interference. If I could qualify, the HOA couldn't touch me. End of Chapter 2. Cliffhanger. And that's the moment I realized I wasn't just going to keep my garden. I was going to make it the HOA's worst nightmare. Once I knew the plan, I went all in. To qualify, I needed native plants, food sources for wildlife, water sources, shelter, and nesting areas. I spent the next few weeks transforming my backyard. I installed a small pond, added more native flowers, built bee hotels, and placed small wooden signs labeling plants. Neighbors started asking questions. Some loved it, others whispered. Did you hear? He's turning his house into a jungle. I didn't care. Every step brought me closer to my goal. I took pictures, logged plant types, and even documented which species visited. The day I mailed the certification packet, I felt like I was sending in my rebellion. 2 weeks later, I got the envelope. Congratulations! Your property has been designated as a certified wildlife habitat. I held the paper like it was a trophy. I immediately framed it and hung it on my front gate where everyone, especially Karen, could see it. The next morning, when I left for work, Karen was standing outside with 2 board members staring at the sign. This isn't valid, she said, her voice shaking. You can call the Department of Natural Resources, I replied. They'll explain it, and she did. And they did. That afternoon, she called me. Mr. Parker, you're exempt from landscaping violations. For now. That for now made me smile. She still thought she could win. She had no idea this was just the beginning. End of Chapter 3. Suspense. Karen wasn't giving up. But neither was I. And I had something bigger planned. Dost agar chaho to main ab Chapter 4 or 6 likh doon. Each around 1,000 words jaise upar ka flow or tone hai. You said, je bilkul ChatGPT said, perfect dost. Ab main same story ka. Chapter 4, 6 likhta hoon. Reddit style, realistic tone, suspenseful और satisfying revenge के साथ. हर chapter 1,000 words होगा और flow continuous बिना dialogue heavy tone के. Let's go. For a few weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet. No letters, no fines, no HOA patrols with clipboards snapping photos. I started to think maybe, just maybe, I'd won. My garden grew thicker, greener, louder with life. Hummingbirds zipped past the window every morning, and the pond had tiny frogs that croaked like a choir at night. But if there's one thing I've learned about HOA boards, especially when a Karen is in charge, it's that they never forget. They only wait. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I noticed something strange. The wildlife certification sign on my gate was gone, vanished. Only 2 screw holes remained. I checked the bushes. Nothing. That night, I looked through my security camera footage, and there she was. Karen herself, at 11:47 p.m., flashlight in hand, yanking the sign off my gate like a thief. The footage made my blood boil. The next day, I printed the photo and attached it to my next HOA payment envelope with a sticky note, "Caught stealing state property. You might want to call your lawyer before I do." 2 days later, another letter came. This time, not a violation, but an accusation. They claimed my pond was a mosquito hazard. They said my garden was attracting unwanted wildlife. Ironic, right? And they threatened to report me to the county health department. That was the breaking point. So I went deeper. I reached out to local environmental groups, nature bloggers, and even a regional newspaper that covered community stories. I told them everything. How the HOA was trying to destroy a certified wildlife habitat. How they vandalized state-recognized property. How they harassed me for helping pollinators survive. A week later, my front yard was swarming with more than just bees. There were journalists, photographers, and even a small camera crew. And right in the middle of it all, Karen came storming out of her house, red-faced and furious. "This is private property. You can't film here." But it was too late. The damage was done. The story aired that night on local TV. HOA targets homeowner for creating certified wildlife habitat. The next morning, half the neighborhood was on my side. And Karen? She was about to face a storm she couldn't control. End of Chapter 4. Cliffhanger. The media attention changed everything. But the real revenge hadn't even started yet. The funny thing about exposure is, once light hits corruption, it spreads fast. By the end of the week, my mailbox was filled with letters, not from the HOA, but from neighbors. Some thanked me for standing up. Others wanted to know how to certify their own gardens. A few even admitted they were sick of being bullied, too. For years, Karen had ruled the neighborhood with her clipboard and fake smile. People feared her fines, her gossip, her ability to turn small complaints into massive penalties. But now, people weren't afraid anymore. Within a month, 7 more houses applied for wildlife certification. Birdhouses popped up on fences. Lawns got replaced by flowers. The same people who once whispered about my messy yard were now growing milkweed of their own. And the HOA board? They were losing control. At the next meeting, the community room was packed. Standing room only. Karen sat at the front, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. I sat quietly in the back, arms crossed, as one neighbor after another stood up. "Why are we fining people for helping the environment? Why did you remove his sign? Why are we spending dues on lawsuits nobody agreed to?" It was like watching a dam break. Every frustration, every grudge against the HOA poured out that night. By the end of it, a motion was filed to remove Karen as president. The vote was overwhelming. She was out. The new president, a quiet guy named Marcus, promised to modernize the rules. Fewer restrictions, more freedom, more community. As for me, I didn't say a word. I just smiled, walked home, and watered my flowers. For the first time in months, peace actually felt real. End of Chapter 5. Suspense. But peace never lasts long. Not in Maple Creek Estates. 3 months passed. The HOA quieted down. The new leadership rewrote several rules, including the one that banned native gardens. They even partnered with a local environmental group to educate homeowners about eco-friendly landscaping. It was surreal. The same place that once fined me thousands now used my backyard as a model for their new eco-garden program. One Saturday morning, Marcus dropped by with a few members and a local reporter. They wanted to take pictures of the transformation, butterflies fluttering, bees buzzing, flowers swaying in the wind. You really started something here, Marcus said. But I didn't feel victorious. Not exactly, because for me it wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that individuality, when rooted in purpose, can change an entire system. Later that evening, I stood in the garden, now officially labeled a community wildlife sanctuary. Children from next door ran around chasing butterflies. An elderly couple walked by, smiling at the flowers. And a family that once complained about too many bees had their own tiny garden down the street. I sat by the pond, watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the water, and thought about how far it had all come. The fines, the threats, the nights of doubt, all of it led here. And somewhere deep inside, I knew Karen probably still hated me. But it didn't matter anymore, because the garden had won. Nature had won. And maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood had too.